Thirsty for love, living in the darkness, crying for a light now, praying for a light now. Nobody in the room, opening the door, hoping for somebody right now. Need somebody right now. I have entered this world safe for a little while, been promised a future, grew to find it blind. And they say it is our time to be strong enough to fight through anything that comes. The ground's breaking, but the children stay in touch. I try to be tough because I'm young and broken. It's like the sky above us falling, but I know how to lift it up after going down. I'm only young and searching for the reason why oceans sing. Hearts are crumbling and suffering. Now I'm picking up the pieces again. Hold on till the end, letting go of
I knew there was a slight glitch. Good afternoon / good evening, grasshoppers. We're looking at the third game of the match between Fischer and Larsen in 1971, the candidates quarterfinals. As we know, this match is a part of Fischer's 20-game undefeated non-drawing streak for the most part. He won nearly every single game, and he began every single game that he could with 1e4. It is interesting that in the last game of the candidates tournament, I'm trying to recall the player, I believe it might have been Zabo. He played 1c4 against that player, and the player walked away and forfeited the game because it was the last round and he had not prepared for c4, and he felt like if he were going to get crushed, he might as well avoid getting crushed by something that he was totally unprepared for. Needless to say, that was an indicator of Bobby Fischer's possible playing c4 in the World Chess Championship, which did occur in 1972. In Game 6, Bobby Fischer began with a move other than 1e4 in a very official setting and won the game of the century. However, the majority of the time, Bobby Fischer is a role model for playing 1e4, especially against the Sicilian, and he is responsible for quite a number of innovations. For example, as everyone was playing his repertoire against him to find out what the best moves were, in 1966 or 1967, Bobby Fischer even began playing 6h3, which today is extremely popular against the Najdorf. But at the time he said, and I believe he played it against Reshevsky, and that was an amazing game with backward pawns on two different open files. And I'm trying to recall the two other opponents that he played against, but literally he's like, okay, copy this. Ironically today, h3 is one of the recommended moves by Kostya Kostovutsky of the Chess Dojo Live fame as well, in his modern open Sicilian repertoire. But here, Bent Larsen is playing the Classical Sicilian, against which Bobby Fischer almost invariably played bishop c4. And today this isn't necessarily thought to be the most dangerous line, primarily because black has the opportunity to play Benko's novelty or innovation, queen to b6. Personally, I like queen to b6 in the classical as well, but for the most part, almost all Sicilians in those days against the Sozin played e6, and Bobby Fischer always dropped his bishop back to b3, avoiding any possible fork tricks in the center. And this was a move that needed to be played sooner or later, and he almost invariably played it then. Bishop e7, bishop e3, and after castles, Bobby Fischer had a previous previous to the candidates match experience where he did play the Velimirovich attack, which offers the most exciting and aggressive attacking possibilities against the Classical Sicilian. I also played it myself. I had one unfortunate experience against a younger player, and then I went back to the standard lines of the Sozin, which Bobby Fischer exhibits here with normally castles kingside. However, in this particular game, the third game of the match, remember he's 2-0 at this point. So he's just free-swinging, freestyling in a way. Now we are doing games from The Unstoppable American, written by Jan Timman, the #1 Dutch player, and he does an excellent job recounting and analyzing every single game, even Fischer's losses. Make sure I have the right game up here, for the most part. Now this game is unfortunately rather uneventful. In the first game we saw Bent Larsen essay the French defense, and I'm not entirely certain that the French defense is Bent Larsen's cup of tea. He prefers more flexible positions such as this one, and the standard move in this particular position might be knight takes d4, and after bishop takes d4, I know that Boris Spassky, I believe in the fourth game of the 1972 match, played a line not unlike this one. I believe Bobby Fischer may have been castled in that particular game. I'm not entirely sure what the in-between move was. However, the exchange of the b5 pawn for the e4 pawn is not to everyone's liking, so therefore it can be said that Black is getting a lot freer play, and Boris Spassky did draw the fourth game of the match before Fischer drew level with the Benoni in actually the third game. Yeah, the Benoni was the game in round 5, and that one is also celebrated in the movie Pawn Sacrifice, as well as game 6. Needless to say, after Black castled on the 8th move, Bobby Fischer essayed f4, and after bishop d7, play transposes back into the main line, and it appears as though a6 is a little redundant. After all, if you're going to play a6, then perhaps your bishop will be going to b7 in those lines. So it's a tricky thing to say that this is any better or worse. But needless to say, after the move a6, Bobby Fischer plays, as usual, in his aggressive style, f5. Now this is the point of bishop to c4, trying to pry open this line toward the king. And Bent Larsen, I don't know that he's necessarily surprised by this, but for whatever reason, perhaps the losses were getting to him, but he makes an uncharacteristic blunder here. On the 11th move of the game, without actually playing the move knight takes d4, and after bishop takes d4, e takes f5, he plays the move queen to c8. And at this point, Bobby Fischer just shreds his center. Now after f takes e6, Black cannot really respond with e takes f6, because knight f5 is going to remove the glue of Black's position. The dark square bishop holding down d6, and life will be very, very unfortunate for Black in this particular position. I mean, there's even more pressure to be added after moves like queen to d8 and bishop f4, and at any moment this bishop may be ripped from the board and the center will be gutted to a great extent. So, needless to say, in this particular position, Larsen responds with bishop takes e6, and after knight takes e6, f takes e6. I realize we don't have our timer up. Let me just put that up for a moment. I was doing an extended stream earlier. And now that the timer is up, we can actually decide upon how we're going to continue this position after f takes e6. And we're going to look for some candidate moves for white. The idea of looking for candidate moves also extends into looking for candidate plans. That is, choosing between several courses of action, not just one move. However, not confining yourself or holding yourself to one particular move is key. So you have to really try to open your eyes to more than just one move in any one particular position, and this is your opportunity. If you are a YouTube subscriber, you will be able to chat on YouTube while this video is going on. And if you are a subscriber on Twitch, you'll be able to chat there. The YouTube link is right there. If you wish to catch this stream on YouTube and you are not a subscriber on YouTube, you will be able to chat and I'll be able to respond there on YouTube. So, as we look for our candidate moves, and if you are watching this video well after the live recording, you may pause the video as well to try to determine your candidate moves. And testing yourself against Fischer's moves is the #1 way to try to improve yourself, trying to find at least the concept, the idea that Fischer would play. And in this particular position, Fischer does choose the strongest move. In fact, he's got very close to a decisive advantage in this position by leaping into the dark squares of the position with knight a4. Larsen responds in the only way that he can find, although there are 3 candidate moves here, other than the move that he played, which is rook to b8. He also has queen to e8, as well as queen to e7, just giving up the e-pawn in both of those cases. Now, both of those moves probably would have been preferable to the idea of playing rook to b8. And he's merely just trying to hang on for dear life here against Fischer. Not necessarily his best or stunning or most impressive moment, because after knight to b6, queen e8 is forced anyway. And after bishop takes e6, check king h8, you'll see that this rook could have had the opportunity to go to the d8 square and try to play for counterplay in the center instead of being stuck on rook on b8, where it does far less. Now, Bobby Fischer does have to do a little bit of regrouping in this position to determine how he's going to continue. After all, he owns the white square d5 and can lock down on this position in many other ways. Once again, we're going to go with some candidate moves. Candidate moves for white. And we'll take some time to see that Bobby Fischer actually does choose the strongest move, but there are several reserve candidates that are almost equal in value to Fischer's chosen course of plan. Now, I don't know that anyone would find Fischer's particular move here, even though it looks obvious now that once you see that he plays it. But he has quite a number of opportunities to seek out and obtain greater positional advantages. So, as it turns out, the moves c3 and c4, locking down on the white squares, are perfectly acceptable. The move a4 is also perfectly acceptable. Even a move such as king h1 is very well thought of. But Bobby Fischer chooses, as he is relatively materialistic, he wasn't necessarily so secure in his ability to sacrifice pawns ad hoc, and plays the move bishop f5, perhaps to soften up the king side, hoping to provoke a move like g6 maybe, after which The sacrifice of the pawn on e4 would happen as a matter of course.
Said, welcome back, Master. You thought by quoting your stream you will get rid of me, but you are wrong, sir.
Alvars, how are you? So in this particular position, the bishop would return to e6, and we can see that the dark squares toward the king and the light squares are incredibly weak. Yep, Alvars is one of our earnest and thoughtful subscribers, as he is trying his best to become a better player, just like the rest of us. Now, knight takes e4, of course, is going to be met by queen to d3 and rook on a to e1. So, in lieu of playing g6 and allowing white's rooks to assume even greater potential on open files in the center, Larsen instead chooses to centralize his knight from c6. Piece relocation is a very important part of every strong player's repertoire, and Fischer, of course, chooses to centralize his queen, and at the same time he's also giving himself the opportunity to bring his rooks across to these very important squares. Now remember, Fischer is a pawn up. He can give back the pawn with that pawn sacrifice and achieve greater gains, but as it turns out, when black tries for queen h5, Fischer centralizes his knight. Once again, of course, this is also threatening the unprotected bishop on e7, which is the dark squared glue, trying to hold everything together, and a knight on the 5th rank is certainly more valuable than it ever was. So Larsen naturally exchanges it off and attempts to dive in with his queen in a rather interesting attempt to gain more material. Fischer, however, had all of this in mind and plays the move bishop to a7, gaining time on the rook. There is no time to grab pawns. The rook is attacked. So after rook on b to e8, perhaps this is where it should have gone, if not d8 from early on. It finally reaches its rightful place on an open file, or a semi-open file, as it's putting pressure on this pawn. So while Alvars is here, we're going to do another round of candidates for white, hoping to find at least the move that Fischer thought of during the game. And his move is very natural and very positional. There are several moves that could be played, all of which leading to a very clear advantage. There is a pawn to be had, there's a pawn to be saved, there's a piece to be centralized, and rooks that need to reach the center as well. So in addition to the move that Fischer chose, which was rook f2, white also had opportunities to grab the pawn. There's certainly nothing wrong with this move. After all, he will have a passed pawn on the a file, which was the concept that
Fischer only got there because he was stealing my moves. No disrespect, Bobby.
Indeed. And of course, there are other opportunities here for him, as he could centralize his bishop. Or, should we go with the rook's idea, we could also centralize our rooks and keep the pressure on the center. Now, losing this pawn, or giving back this pawn to a queen, a wayward queen that is floating around, would once again, of course, be met by either queen takes b7 or bishop to d4, just as we had discussed. So in any event, Fischer chose rook to f2. He's very mindful of his material, and Larsen had two different options for the retreat of his queen, not counting c4, of course. And ultimately, he chooses the best one. there's certainly probably nothing wrong with the idea of playing queen h5 or queen c4, given its dire straits, but he decided to try to get rid of Fischer's most aggressive piece, the queen. Now, of course, Fischer's not averse to this. After all, he is, after the move c3, protecting his b2 pawn, and he is up a pawn. And bringing home the point is just a matter of course for him. Bishop to h4, g3, queen takes d5, e takes d5. The process of winning the game is further simplified since the bishop loses time, and we will go with one more round of candidate moves before Fischer begins to bring the point home. Not even sure that Elmars was alive when Bobby Fischer was reaching his peak or his heyday. But let's check it out. Once again, you have pieces that could be relocated, outposted, and centralized. I thought so. At least Fischer was alive while you were alive. That's somewhat important. So in this particular position, the move that Bobby chose was rook on a to f1. And we have mentioned in previous streams that the stronger player often brings the rooks to the better squares faster than the opponent. The stronger player knows how to place his rooks very carefully and cautiously and purposefully. And already, White not only has the bishop pair and an extra pawn, but now he has two very serious rooks on an open file. This process of doubling rooks hopes to get those rooks to the 7th rank, whereupon they might march across, or in this particular case they're performing a bit of a pin against the bishop on f6 and forcing further simplification because he's a pawn up. This is, of course, exactly what he wishes to do. So Larsen goes about the process of trying to activate his rook, perhaps tickling Black's bishop and or rook in the process, trying to simplify and get rid of the two bishops. But as it turns out, after the move bishop e6, there is no further point in trying to get a knight to e3. After all, the bishop on a7 is covering it, so that after rook to a8, now he's decentralizing a rook, and this is certainly not his best plan. Certainly trying to hold the 2nd rank.
d4.
Absolutely, bishop d4 was also a possible move in that particular position. Bishop to d4, b3, followed by c4 as well. Another option. Rook to b1 could have been considered a very cautious move as well. However, after the bishop retreated and the rooks doubled, the probing knight is cut off by the bishop going to e6, that outpost square, forming a bit of a wedge between the two sides of the board and any type of action. After all, no rooks go to the c file, and it looks very awkward for him. So rook to a8, c'est la vie. Even b6 might have been a better move, with the idea of rook to e7 after, if he wished to find a move that could pose some problems for Black. White would probably respond with rook to f4, so that he might move the other rook to f2 in case of knight e3, after the move b6, that is. However, with the move rook to a8, Fischer certainly does have to centralize his bishop, and he's not at all worried about the doubled pawns in the center. In fact, he uses this to his advantage after the exchange of rooks, to try to bring his king toward the center, evict the knight, continue his methods of improving his play. Now, of course, if we could get a pawn to g5, this would be a mating net. So therefore, the first move is relatively obvious, and Fischer goes after the weakness on d6. And at this moment, we are seriously lacking in a certain amount of play. Now, Fischer's opponent, Bent Larsen, is no slouch. He is one of the best players in the world. In fact, during Bobby Fischer's hiatus just a year earlier, I believe Bent Larsen was the highest rated Western player. And Fischer presumes to exchange the pawn on d4 for the pawn on b4. And even allows Fischer a passed pawn in the form of the d pawn, which is quite disheartening because with the king cut off on this file, the king will not be able to cross any further than the f file, and this king is going to move right on in. So after the move a5, king to d4, king f7, rook to e2, Bent Larsen, in a rather depressed fashion, decides to hang it up. After all, there is no stopping the pushing of the pawn and the help and the escorting of the pawn in, and this king is a spectator. It is more than decisive in this particular position. It's possible that Black could have continued with
said,
a4.
Love how you explain, but still going to ask, would you give me the honor to play against you, master?
I run diligent daily dojos morning and evening lately, it seems like. So I'm certain that we'll have a chance to play. Haven't you entered dojo tournaments before? After a takes b3, a takes b3, rook a1. As we already know, this rook is going to escort the pawn in. And we're going to cover from behind. But no matter how we get our king into the position, we'll have some pressure on the b pawn as well as on the king side.
Our timelines are a bit different, my friend.
Indeed. So it was at this moment that Bent Larsen chose to resign this game, thus going down 3-0 in the match. And in our next video, we'll be covering Bent Larsen's improvement on this particular Sicilian, the Classical Sicilian against the Sozin, in the 5th game of the match. We'll be back with that in our next video. Hang tight.
Said, can't wait, sir.
No worries. Hang on to your hat.